we're, g- we're going to be imagining ourselves into an ancient vineyard from the book of the prophet Isaiah. We'll be discovering how God feels about the fragile world in which we live. God's going to invite us to become stewards of God's creation, to care for the vineyard that God has given us, to make it our common home. So let's begin our prayer this evening by just allowing our bodies to relax, by allowing our mind to rest, and allowing our spirit to release whatever has happened today. Let's just take a moment to store up the memories that we want to keep, and to let go of any things that you'd prefer to forget. As you rest into this moment, allow yourself to ease very gently into God. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. The passage that we're going to pray with is probably one of the oldest passages in the whole of the Bible. So let's begin by honoring this ancient text. It begins as a song of love. The one who sings the song is singing about God's love for a vineyard. The one who sings is singing about God's love for God's people. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. Let's begin by imagining the fertile landscape in which God's vineyard is set. The rolling hills, whether covered with grass or with trees. The evening sky, whether golden yellow or pale blue. The sun as it gently dips towards the horizon. We open our ears to the sounds of nature, whether we can hear birdsong in the distance or the cricket's nightly call. We imagine the cool air on our skin as the evening draws in. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. Let's stand in the vineyard that God is making and reach down to the earth, feeling the soil between our fingers. In whatever way you like, imagine God toiling away, first of all to clear the earth of stones, and then to plough the necessary furrows, and then to tenderly plunge the roots of the vines into the ground. Not just any kind of vine, but the choicest of vines that will yield the finest of grapes. He built a tower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. Let's watch God at work as God goes further to protect the vineyard and provide for its future. With stone, God builds a tower for a watchman. If fire breaks out or disaster looms, the alert will sound. Let's watch as he hews a wine press out of the rock so that wine will flow at the harvest. Take a step back to admire the handiwork that God has made in creating this beautiful vineyard. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. What has happened to the vineyard? Notice the difference between the juicy grapes for which God had hoped and the moldy grapes that were gathered in at the harvest. What's gone wrong with the vineyard that God has made? Take a moment to dwell on how God looks at his creation, whether with disappointment, dismay, with hope. We are the vines planted by God's hand. God creates, God nourishes, God protects, God hopes for the future. What's happened to the vineyard where we live? We see the damage to the environment, the suffering of the poor, the violence of war. Have we been stewards of God's vineyard? Have we tended the vines? Have we pruned the branches? Have we watered the roots? Have we yielded the good grapes that God wanted, or the grapes that are bad? Listen to what God has to say. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? Notice how God doesn't judge us for our failures in taking care of the vineyard. Instead, God says, judge between me and my vineyard. Take a moment to gaze in wonder upon a God who deflects judgment away from us and turns it towards himself. Could you imagine a God who invites us to judge him? And now, says God, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. What's your response to this God who makes an invitation to judge him for the failure of the vineyard instead of judging yourself? Listen now as God shows us the consequences of not taking care of the creation that He has given us, of not taking care of His vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. Imagine the hedge of the vineyard torn down, the wild animals roving through it to feed. As you look upon our own world, what are the forces that threaten our ecological sustainability? I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. Now watch as the wall of the vineyard is broken, leaving the vines to be trampled. What are the unchecked desires of the human heart that allow the natural world to go unprotected? I will make it a waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. And watches our inattention to the vineyard, leaves it empty and desolate, overgrown with briars and thorns. How has our lack of stewardship laid waste to the world? I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. Finally reach down and touch the earth again. Feel the dryness of this barren wasteland between your fingers, this barren wasteland which was once the precious vineyard of God. If we don't become stewards of what we have been given, then that vineyard might be lost forever. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. As you look upon our fragile world, all the violence that is taking place, the cry of the poor for justice, the cry of the earth for healing, the cry of the cities for peace. How is it that God has not destroyed our world as he could have? How is it that God has not broken down its walls? How is it that God has not left it to be trampled? How is it that God has not abandoned it to become overgrown with briars and thorns? Notice with wonder how nature is never overcome, how creation keeps blooming forth, how even in the same wounds where suffering is to be found, new life is flowing into the world. What word could express that wonder? We are God's beloved, and God has not turned judgment upon us, but has turned judgment upon God's self. We ponder the mystery of God's merciful love. Let's rest for a moment in that love and enter more deeply into God's presence. Let's speak to that God as two who are beloved speak to each other about what we have seen and what we felt, about our hopes and dreams for the future. Let's speak about that wonder that God has chosen to hold us in life and hold us in being, despite all the things that have gone wrong in our fragile world. And listen to his response. And as we come to the end of this time of prayer, let's hear again the words of the prophet Isaiah as he tells us this song of the beloved for his vineyard. Let's hear them spoken by that God who loves us from the bottom of his heart, in spite of our fragility, in spite of our brokenness, in spite of our woundedness. A God who withholds his anger from us so that we can be loved. Let me sing for my beloved my love song concerning his vineyard. My beloved had a vineyard on a very fertile hill. He dug it and cleared it of stones and planted it with choice vines. He built a tower in the midst of it and hewed out a wine vat in it. He expected it to yield grapes, but it yielded wild grapes. And now, inhabitants of Jerusalem and people of Judah, judge between me and my vineyard. What more was there to do for my vineyard that I have not done in it? When I expected it to yield grapes, why did it yield wild grapes? And now I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will remove its hedge, and it shall be devoured. I will break down its wall, and it shall be trampled down. I will make it waste. It shall not be pruned or hoed, and it shall be overgrown with briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that they rain no rain upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the people of Judah are his pleasant planting. He expected justice, but saw bloodshed, righteousness, but heard a cry. In just a moment, we're going to split off into groups to share something of our experience of that prayer. And so I just wanted to propose a few different questions that might help you to discuss what happened for you. You might like to think about some of the threats to ecological sustainability at this moment in time. You discovered in that prayer a way of becoming a steward of creation. And perhaps to have a thought about that image of a God who doesn't pass judgment upon us, but rather turns the judgment back on him, how that image can foster your ecological commitment.